times.
Okay, got it. So we're good?
Yeah.
All right, I'm going to mute and listen in.
All right. Hello, everybody. It's me, Father Rob. You can shut that off. Okay, tonight we're going to talk about, well, two parables. We're going to finish up talking about the Gospel of Luke, the Good Samaritan parable, and then we're going to talk a little bit about the parable of the Prodigal Son. Okay, so to get right into it, as I talked about it last week, I mentioned that a phrase that has become very popular and very much a part of our vernacular is Good Samaritan. And we refer to many people as Good Samaritans if they help, even change someone's flat, or a medical person, EMT type of thing, who aids a victim of a terrible accident, or someone who intervenes on behalf of a child in the face of bullies, or any of these different circumstances. We can use that term Good Samaritan for. Now, that's a very popular saying, and I don't want to deny that that certainly has meaning and significance for our culture, and it puts this parable in our minds too. So there is some good in that, but it also, if we just limit that parable to someone doing a good act, then I think we lose some of the parable, some of the meaning and the purpose of the parable. So if we follow the logic of that use, it comes down to us thinking that Jesus told this parable to say, do good to other people. And if that's all he had to say, we have to ask the question, why didn't he just say that? So obviously there's something else here in this parable that we're meant to look at. And again, I just want to remind everybody that the purpose of a parable is, again, to kind of tease our brain and our mind and our heart into thinking about it, bringing us into the story, bringing us into the characters in the story, and really looking at it closely. So let's look a little bit at this parable of the Good Samaritan. Of course, the context, as I said, was the journey to Jerusalem. So Jesus is now on his way to he knows he's going to his death in Jerusalem, and he knows he's going there for a purpose. And so he's trying to teach the disciples again about what the cost of discipleship is. So that's part of the context of this parable too. And we have to look at when and how this parable was told. What happens? How does this parable come into the story? Why, if you're walking to Jerusalem, why tell a story like this? Well, remember, let me get that up. I just want to reread that parable to everybody. Okay. Okay, Luke chapter 10. Okay, the 72 disciples have just come back from this great experience of being sent out to tell everybody in these different towns that Jesus is coming, and while they've done that, they've witnessed some miracles that they themselves have enacted through using the name of Jesus. So it's a moment of great joy and happiness as they come back to tell Jesus what's going on and what has happened. And then right in the middle of all this joy and excitement, we hear of this scholar of the law, we're told, or so a lawyer comes in. And when Mark talks about a lawyer, it's not like we consider a lawyer. It would be more along the lines of someone who studied the Jewish law. So who are they? They were the Pharisees and the scribes. And so this is who Mark Luke, I'm sorry, is talking about when he says a scholar of the law or a lawyer. There's someone in that group of the scribes and Pharisees. And this lawyer asked the question, but first we're told he stood up to test Jesus and said, "Teacher, what must I do to inherit eternal life?" Jesus he's a rabbi, and the way that the rabbis taught was they turned your question into a question back to you. And what does Jesus do? He says, "What is written in the law? How do you read it?" Just like a rabbi would do, just like a teacher would do at his time. And then we're told, the lawyer says in reply, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your being, and with all your strength, and with all your mind, and your neighbor as yourself." So then Jesus says, "You've answered it correctly. Go and do this, and you will live." Jesus puts this in everything that he's doing here now is talking about doing something too. It's not just teaching to know something, but it's teaching to move you into action. So when you hear his teaching, you're called to move into action, because again, he's teaching the disciples how to be a disciple, basically. And then, of course, then we get it. The lawyer is not, he feels like he didn't get his test done. So he's asking again, because he wished to justify himself. He said to Jesus, "And who is my neighbor?" Now that question, when it's asked by the lawyer, is probably there to make Jesus limit that idea of neighbor, to say, my neighbor is such and such. It's my neighbor is all my Jewish brothers and sisters. So that leaves out the Romans, it leaves out the Samaritans, it leaves out anybody who's not Jewish. And so the lawyer again is trying to get Jesus to make a statement that limits that, and then he's gonna pop something else on it. So Jesus, again, he hears that question and he responds with the parable of the Good Samaritan. I'm going to read it to you now. Jesus said, "A man fell victim to robbers, and he went down from Jerusalem to Jericho. They stripped and beat him and went off, leaving him half dead. A priest happened to be going down that same road, but when he saw the man, he passed by on the opposite side. Likewise, a Levite who came upon him was moved with likewise a Levite came to the place, and when he saw him, he passed by on the opposite side. But a Samaritan traveler who came upon the man was moved with compassion at the sight. He approached the victim, poured oil and wine over his wounds, and bandaged them. Then he lifted him up on his own animal, took him to an inn, and cared for him. The next day he took out 2 silver coins and gave them to the innkeeper with the instruction, take care of him. If you spend more than what I have given you, I shall repay you on my way back. And now Jesus, again, in true rabbinical form, says, which of these 3, in your opinion, was neighbor to the robber's victim? And the lawyer answers, the one who treated him with mercy. Jesus said to him, go and do likewise. Again, that command to hear and then act and obey. So again, we're the lawyer interrupts this moment of great joy, and he's trying to test Jesus. It's not a friendly conversation. It's meant to be a controversial statement. He's trying to get Jesus to say something controversial, to say something wrong, so that he can gather evidence, so to speak, against him, and win his argument of some kind. So it's now we listen to that. We're told that this Jesus is not just speaking to the lawyer here, but he's the 72 disciples, the disciples of Jesus, the close ones, are there, and Jesus is teaching them too. He's teaching them about who their neighbor is too. So in that way, it's meant for us as listeners as well. So it's a as I said, let me get here. So when we listen to that story, I think it's important. A couple of things are necessary for us to look at. First is that when Luke is going through in his gospel, let's look at the character of priest and Levite. How does he portray them in his gospel? I think the first place you look at is right at the beginning of the Gospel of Luke, in the story of the birth of John, or the conception and birth of John the Baptist. Who does the angel go to? The angel Gabriel goes first, before he goes to Mary even, he goes to Zechariah. Who is Zechariah? He's a priest in the temple. He's part of the Levite tradition. So he's a priest in the temple of Jerusalem. And what's he doing? He's offering sacrifice in the temple at Jerusalem. He's doing the prayer in the temple at Jerusalem when the angel Gabriel comes to him. So he's portrayed, he's not a bad person. And Luke portrays priests of the temple quite often in this positive light. So when we hear this story, I think first, many people go to this idea that Luke is saying all these priests of the temple are bad, all these Levites are bad. But in reality, he's not. What he's doing is he's inviting us into this story. He's inviting us into this thing. And we have to look at these characters and who they are, and try to understand where they're coming from too. You look at the priest and the Levite, both of them are faithful Orthodox Jews, of course. And as a faithful Orthodox Jew and a priest, in order to offer sacrifice in the temple, in order to do their job, they need to remain ritually clean. So they can, so they have to beware of doing something that would make them ritually unclean. Now, there are many things that would cause them to be ritually unclean. If they were to come in contact with a woman before they were going, like the day before they were going into the temple, they would have to purify themselves. If they were to come in contact with a leper, that would cause them to be unclean, ritually unclean. Also, in this story, and this is where we have to go to, is that they would, if they came in contact with a dead body, they would also become ritually unclean, and they would not be able to offer the sacrifice, which is not for them, but it's for the whole people of Israel. So they're, in a sense, they have good reason for why they go to the other side of the road. They're not being thoughtless. They're obviously thinking about this too, because they see this man on the side of the road. There's lots of reasons why a man would be on the side of the road there. One of them could be he was dead. So if you go over there and you go to that person, and you're a priest, and you try to minister to him. You try to see if he's dead or alive. You shake him or touch him, you become ritually unclean, and it takes days to purify yourself. Then also another reason why that body would be on the side of the road would be that robbers left him there as a way to attract someone to come to this body, to the aid of this person, and the robbers would then ambush them. And this road, the Jericho's road from Jerusalem to Jericho, was a very dangerous road, notoriously dangerous at that time. Everybody who traveled it and those who didn't travel it knew how dangerous it was to travel that road. So they would be very wary of anybody lying on the side of the road or anything that might cause them to stop, because it could be an opportunity for robbers to come and make them dead, make them the next temptation for other people to stop. So they could have been thinking of it in that way as well. So these Levite and the priest, as they pass by this body, they're not without thought. They had reasons for doing what they did. It wasn't like they just were evil people and, oh, I don't help anybody. I'm too good to help anybody. No, they are human beings like we are. And telling these parables again, we're kind of being teased. Our mind is being teased a little bit to think about it, to enter into all of the characters, not just one of them. And then it's important not to paint an unnecessarily unattractive portrait of the priest and the Levite, because it really weakens the story. So the story is a story that people would be familiar with, and anybody who traveled that road would certainly be familiar with, and they would understand, and they could identify with the priest and the Levite. Now we, as I said, while their behavior was not commendable, it was certainly not without reason. They made a choice between duty and duty, you might say. The duty to serve their neighbor and the duty to offer sacrifice in the temple. So now the third character in this story, or the fourth character really, is the Samaritan. Now, when Jesus is telling this story, his disciples and the lawyer, as they're listening to it, would have been shocked, literally shocked, at that a Samaritan would have done that for anybody, but especially because, again, Jesus is portraying this as a Jewish person walking that road from Jerusalem to Jericho, or Jericho to Jerusalem, and he's and this Jewish person is on the side of the road, and a Samaritan. It's hard to understand what that meant to the Jewish listener at that time. That this Samaritan would react with compassion, which that just was shocking to them. They couldn't. It would kind of slap them in the face and say, "Whoa, and it's also Luke in this story. The Samaritan is reacting with a compassion that Luke only associates with God in his gospel, so that the the other place is with God the Father of Jesus and with the Father of the Prodigal Son, which we're going to get to in a little bit. So these acts of mercy are so great that they're kind of portrayed as being almost divine. So it's hard, like I said, to find an analogy in our culture to what that Samaritan meant to the listeners of Jesus at the time. But it would have been something so unbelievable and so shocking to them that it really would have been a slap in the face to them. So now we look at what he did. He delayed his own journey. He stopped, putting himself at risk. Okay, he could have, this wounded man could have been a trap to allow the robbers to rob him and beat him, but he risked his life, and he risked danger to himself, and then he takes this man and he wraps his wounds up. He binds his wounds. He takes the man and he puts him on his own animal. So he gives him, something of his own, and he does this, and through these actions he reverses the activity of the bandits. So who else does that in the Gospel of Luke? Jesus. What does Jesus do? He goes to Jerusalem. He gets to Jerusalem. What does he do? He is tried and convicted of a crime he did not commit, of a sin he did not commit. He dies on the cross. He suffers and he dies on the cross for sin he did not commit. And so he goes through that and reverses the actions of Adam and Eve. He reverses the consequences of Adam and Eve. And this is what this Samaritan is doing in this story too. He's reversing the actions of the bandit, the activity of the bandit. The bandits took money. The Samaritan gave his own money to the innkeeper, and his time to the innkeeper to so that he could take care of him, whereas the bandits took the money that wasn't theirs. The bandits beat the Samaritan. They beat the man. The Samaritan binds the wounds to heal them. The bandits left him for dead and did not return. The Samaritan took the man, picked him up, rode him on his own animal, we're told, and then he brought him to a place and he cared for him. He took his own time. He delayed his own trip, and he took his own time to make sure that this man was going to be cared for. And then he promised that he would return on his way back and pay for anything else that would have come up in caring for the person. So the Samaritan, in his actions, reverses the actions of the bandits. And again, it's an allusion to what Jesus is about to do. And if you think about it, it's an allusion to what the disciples are going to be asked to do as well. So with this promise of return and continued care, the parable ends. And then Jesus ends it in typical form. First of all, what does he do? In rabbinical form, he says, which of these three do you think was a neighbor to the man? He answers the question with a question, and forces the lawyer, to answer the question, so that he turned that question that was trying to limit who a neighbor was into a question, to an answer that expanded it to anybody and everybody, to a wide limit. And when the man answers the question, I mean, you can see how shocked and in a sense how he was just unable even to say the Samaritan. What did he say? He said, he answered, the one or the man who treated him with mercy. He couldn't even say the Samaritan was his neighbor. He had to say the one who treated him with mercy was his neighbor. That's how he answered the question. And Jesus then tells him, as he does so frequently, he says, go and do likewise. Go and do likewise. Again, the telling of the story and the rephrasing of the question. He's next page here. The lawyer, so he refuses to move away from this idea of obedience and action, hearing and action and acting, and he wants his disciples to know that they're being asked to behave in this way, to behave in a merciful way, in a mercy that is almost knows no bounds, and a love that knows no bounds. And so it calls us to act as neighbors to everyone, really. Some questions I think this might call us to today are, what boundaries have we placed on our love? Who do we see that the people that are lying beaten on the side of our roads, that we pass by because we do not want to become unclean in some way, or for whatever reason we might have? And remember that the one posing these questions is Jesus, who is, as I said, the one walking down the road to Jerusalem, where he will be beaten and crucified to show the ultimate neighbor love for us all. So Jesus tells his disciples what to do, but he also shows his disciples what to do by his actions and his in his life. Now, the next, I don't know if you have, by the way, if you have any questions, you can, if you're on Facebook, you can type those into your comment section and send them to Michelle, and she'll give them to me, and I'll try to answer them. If you have, if you're on Zoom, there aren't too many people on Zoom, but if you're on Zoom and you have a question, there's a raise hand button there on Zoom that you can, when you look over in the right hand corner of your screen, it says more up there. I think if you press that, you'll find that there are, it says raise hands, and we can ask the questions live that way. Okay. Now the next parable I want to go into is the parable. Well, it's actually the whole of chapter 15 in the Gospel of Luke, and it really, I guess, it consists of three parables. Okay, the first is the parable of the lost sheep. The second is the parable of the lost coin, and the third is what we call the parable of the prodigal son. Now, I want to look at each of these, and again, this is a context where we have to look at it from that sense. It's still on the road to Jerusalem, and here we have apparently they're sitting down and resting on that road. As I said, this trip to Jerusalem was kind of a long, meandering one. It wasn't this real straight trip to Jerusalem. It was a long, meandering trip. So here's the first one, the parable of the lost sheep. The tax collectors and sinners were all drawing near to listen to Jesus, but the Pharisees and scribes began to complain, saying, "This man welcomes sinners and eats with them." So to them, Jesus addressed this parable. What man among you, having 100 sheep and losing one of them, would not go leave the 99 in the desert and go after the lost one until he finds it? And when he does find it, he sets it on his shoulders with great joy. And upon his arrival, he calls together his friends and neighbors and says to them, "Rejoice with me, because I have found my lost sheep." I tell you, in just the same way, there will be more joy in heaven over one sinner who repents than over 99 righteous people who have no need of repentance. And now the parable of the lost coin is the next one. And I'm just going to continue reading that. Or what woman, having 10 coins and losing one, would not light a lamp and sweep the house, searching carefully until she finds it? And when she does find it, she calls together her friends and neighbors and says to them, "Rejoice with me, because I have found the coin that I lost." In just the same way, I tell you, there will be rejoicing among the angels of God over one sinner who repents. So these first two parables in that chapter of Luke, they are talking about, well, first of all, the reason Jesus is telling them, and to whom is he telling them? He's telling them to again, here we have it. But the Pharisees and scribes began to complain, saying, "This man welcomes sinners and eats with them." So there's a little bit of a controversy. There's a confrontation happening here. The Pharisees and scribes are there, and they're challenging Jesus. They're saying he eats with sinners, and he welcomes sinners, and he eats with them. So Jesus is addressing this parable to them, we're told. But at the same time, he's also addressing it to these tax collectors and sinners who are with him, drawing near to him and listening to him. So he's got two audiences there. And so it's these parables, where is it? You see, first of all, the challenge that the Pharisees and scribes are making is one where we have to understand a little bit more about the culture that they lived in. You were often related to what the people that hung around with you, so to speak. So that if you hung around with the righteous people, you would be judged as righteous. You would be judged as good. If you hung around with sinners and tax collectors and prostitutes, then you would be judged as evil, no matter what you said or did or anything, because you were hanging around with these bad people. So you were obviously must have done something wrong, must have done something sinful to be attractive at all, but to these sinners that they talk about. And so Luke's Jesus here confronts the claim that good and righteous people make, these good and righteous people make. He says that he's associating with the wrong kinds of people. He again takes these parables of the lost sheep and the lost coin, and he pulls them out of ordinary life, right? I think all of us know, we might not know about lost sheep, but we certainly know about lost money. And we can relate to that a little bit, and how how eagerly we might look after that to try to find it. And so it's a parable that all of his listeners would have been able to identify with, whether they were Pharisees and scribes or tax collectors and sinners. So his whole audience would be able to relate to these stories. not just one group of them. So he's speaking to both audiences. And so the first two parables begin with the loss of something. And then that's being found. And what happens? These joyful celebrations accompany the finding of these items. The focus of both of these parables is in that joyous, exuberant party that is thrown when they find that thing that was lost, the sheep or the coin. And he makes a declaration about the heavenly celebration for the repentance of one sinner. And as he says, the 99 who righteous people have no need of repentance. Or I tell you, there will be rejoicing among the angels of God over one sinner who repents. So it's very much, it's about the idea of repentance too. But the reaction of the heavenly hosts and of God when one of those sinners repents. So finding and restoring the lost gives pleasure to God, as well as to all who are about God's business. Again, teaching his disciples, finding and restoring the lost gives pleasure to God, as well as to all who are about God's business. So it's teaching his disciples how to be disciples. And now we come to the parable of the prodigal son. I'm going to read that. Then he said, a man had two sons. And the younger son said to his father, Father, give me the share of your estate that should come to me. So the father divided the property between them. So the father divided the property between them. Oops. Where is it? After a few days, the younger son collected all his belongings and set off to a distant country, where he squandered his inheritance on a life of dissipation. When he had freely spent everything, a severe famine struck that country, and he found himself in dire need. So he hired himself out to one of the local citizens, who sent him to his farm to tend the swine. And he longed to eat his fill of the pods on which the swine fed, but nobody gave him any. Coming to his senses, he thought, how many of my father's hired workers have more than enough food to eat? But here am I dying from hunger. Shall I get up and go to my father? I shall get up and go to my father, and I shall say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I no longer deserve to be called your son. Treat me as you would treat one of your hired workers. So he got up and went back to his father. While he was still a long way off, his father caught sight of him and was filled with compassion. He ran to his son, embraced him, and kissed him. His son said to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I no longer deserve to be called your son. But his father ordered his servants, quickly, bring the finest robe and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. Take the fattened calf and slaughter it. Then let us celebrate with a feast, because this son of mine was dead and has come to life. He was lost and has been found. Then the celebration began. Now the older son had been out in the field, and on his way back, as he neared the house, he heard the sound of music and dancing. He called one of the servants and asked what this might mean. The servant said to him, your brother has returned, and your father has slaughtered the fattened calf because of him, because he has him back safe and sound. The elder son became angry, and when he refused to enter the house, his father came out and pleaded with him. He said to the father in reply, look, All these years I served you, and not once did I disobey your orders. Yet you never gave me even a young goat to feast on with my friends. But when your son returns, who swallowed up your property with prostitutes, for him you slaughter the fattened calf. He said to him, my son, you are here with me always. Everything I have is yours. But now we must celebrate and rejoice, because your brother was dead and has come to life again. He was lost and has been found. So that's a beautiful story. And again, I think it's, we call it the story or the parable of the prodigal son, but it might be better named as the waiting father. Because when you really look at it, the main character of this parable is not the lost son, not the younger son, but the father. He's in all three of the scenes. He's in the scene where the younger son asked for his inheritance. He's in the scene where the younger son returns. He's in the scene where the older son stays out. So he's in all three of these different scenes of this 3-act play, you might say. And it's a very short one, though. So so he seems to be the main character in this. So maybe we should rename this the waiting father, because what does he do in this story? He waits for his son to return. When his other son refuses to come in, he goes out and tries to bring him in. So, as I said, he's more like the central character in the story. And but let's take a look at these three main characters in this story. There's a lot of stuff here in this reading. First of all, the younger son. Okay, here he is, and he's we have to look at him, and these parables are meant again to bring us into the story. It's a familiar story. It's a familiar. Anybody can relate to being a son, or being a child of a father, and anybody can relate to that sense. It's a common theme again, something that people can enter into, can identify with. And so the younger son, he comes into the story, and what does he do? He says, Father, give me a share of your estate, the share of your estate that should come to me. Now this action that he did, these words that he said, and what he was asking for was equal with him saying, Father, I wish you were dead. I'm going to act as if you are dead. Give me my share of the inheritance now. So he's basically he's wishing ill upon his father at this point. And then we're told he stays there a couple of days maybe, and then he heads out after he makes his plans for his life of dissipation. And so, I mean, what were his reasoning? What were his reasons for this? What were his thoughts? Who was this child that would act so belligerently, that would act so unthinkingly, so selfishly? Who was this child? And it's important for us to enter into the full story and the whole scene, and find out where it was. And as I said, this story is frequently called the prodigal son. Now, the prodigal means characterized by profuse or wasteful expenditure, recklessly spendthrift. So he's out there just spending on himself, on his own pleasures, on these things that are and not caring about where the next, anything for the next day or time or year or the future. He's just wasting his life and his money. So while it is true that this son is an important character in this story, we must remember that when Jesus tells a parable, he always includes each of the characters in the story for a reason. So this younger son there at the beginning seems very selfish, very self-centered, and wasting things. He doesn't care about, he doesn't protect any of his own self or anybody else. He doesn't care about others' feelings, doesn't care about anything he says or does. And so he goes out in this life of dissipation. And it's it's interesting. Again, the story includes this little detail where he says he hired himself out to one of the local citizens who sent him to his farm to tend the swine. The irony of that is again, shows the writing abilities of Luke, where he talks about this Jew being forced to feed swine. Now, pigs are unclean animals. And this Jew, they don't eat pigs because it's a meat that the Torah bans. And so they're not supposed to eat it. Not supposed to eat pork products. And here he is, he's feeding the food of Samaritans and other peoples. So that irony is there, that he's sunk so low that he's feeding these unclean animals, and he wants to eat what he's feeding them. He's gotten so low in his life that he's realized that he's at the point of no return almost. And then we're told he comes to his senses, and he realizes who his father is. He realizes it's like this moment of light, of enlightenment, in which he's all of a sudden he realized, it wasn't that bad on the farm. It wasn't, and it wasn't even that bad for the servants. And I could live as a servant there, maybe. And so now he realizes as we say, he repents of it. He turns around. His life turns around at that moment, where that's what repent means, to turn around. And he turns from this selfish, self-centered boy, only looking at his own needs and own wants, to someone who realizes the care that his father had for him and for his servants. And he realizes there's something good there. There's something nice there. There's something worth something there. And it isn't money, because he's saying he'll go back to the father and work as a slave. He's not talking about getting more money from the father. He's just talking about going back and serving him as a slave, as a servant. And so then he decides to do it, and he starts heading back. And when he gets there, close enough where the father could see him, the father runs out to meet him. And he knows what he's going to say. He realizes who he is now is a servant of the father. That's all he wants to be. He doesn't want to be the son. He wants to be the servant of the father. That's all. And what does the father do? He goes out to him. He probably embraces him. He puts the robe on him, sandals on his feet, a ring on his finger. He makes him his son again. He announces it to the world, and he brings them in for this huge celebration. Okay, So the son, again, this moment when this happens, I think Jesus speaks about this frequently in the Gospel of Luke, and all the Gospels really, how in the story where he talks about the servant, where he says that the vigilant servant is there waiting for Jesus, waiting for the master to come home. And they don't know the hour when the master is going to come. And if the master finds the servant ready and vigilant on his arrival, what does he do? He will gird himself, have them lie down at the table and proceed to wait on them. So in their readiness to serve, all of a sudden they become served. The Father becomes the servant of them. And so here we are in this story where that shows itself again to the listeners. And now let's talk a little bit about so as I said, just let's remember that a parable should be able to get our attention, and it should be joined by a stubborn refusal in us to make its meaning easily accessible to the hearer. And a parable should put a burden on the hearer that is not intellectual. Rather, it should tease the mind into active thought, meaning it should bring us into the story. It should put us in the story. We should be able to put ourselves into each of these characters, so to speak. So let's talk about the oldest son now. That's a let me see. Just gotta move down one here. And the older son in this story, he is not in the house at the time. He's not on the he's on the property somewhere, but he's not in the house. And he has been faithful to the father. He has not insulted the father. He has worked on the property of the father. And he has been, as I said, he's done everything the father has asked him to do. He is orthodox, you might say. He is a good Catholic. He is a good Jew. He is doing everything he needs to do. And I think before I get into the oldest son a little bit, I think it's important. Like again, this is a story of a family too. So we have two sons and the father, and I think anybody who has a brother or sister can relate to this story on that level. We can understand. I think any of us really could understand how easy it would be to be like the younger son and say, I want what's mine, instead of, because my brother's getting everything. He gets everything. I don't get everything. I don't get anything. How many times have you heard that said by a brother or a sister growing up? How many times have we thought we understood that resentment, that selfishness, even in ourselves? How many times did we say that? And so that selfishness and that sense of I'm not, that resentment that is there can easily be seen and related to, I think, like I said, by anybody who's in a family of more than one child. And I think even in a family of one child, there's still that sense of I don't know if it's entitlement. I don't know how to even put a word on it, but that sense that somehow I'm owed something for being me, and so I better get it. And if someone else gets something that I want, then I resent them for it. Even so, anybody can relate to that sense of it. The older son, as I said, he's the good son. He's the perfect son, and and we again look at the story. What happens in the story? The good son, who's been home for all this time that the younger son was out there blowing his father's money and not doing anything good, and just spending it on everything and anything, any pleasure you might want, and he's getting a big party for when he comes back. The younger son, who stayed home all this time, won't go home. He won't go home. He's outside and he won't come in. And again, that irony of it. He's talking to the Pharisee here, talking to the scribes, and even to the sinners. He's saying, okay, we have to be careful here. We can easily lose sight of what's important in our faith, and how we act in our faith, and how we what our faith is all about. Again, that universal neighbor idea comes again playing out in here, and that we're neighbors even to tax collectors and sinners, and we're brothers. I mean, he's saying almost we're brothers even to tax collectors and sinners. If you know my brothers, you know that I was brothers to tax collectors and sinners, to accountants, and so the so it's like I said, it's easy to identify with these characters. And the younger son is outside of the home, outside, but the father goes out to him. The servant father goes out to his servant son, to his good son, the older son, and he's talking to him, and he's trying to get him to come in. I want you to also look here, though. What happens here? The younger son doesn't go out to the older son, and I think that it's a little detail, but it's there. We don't know if the younger son didn't know that the older son was out there. We don't know if the younger son was just, again, too busy partying to think about his older brother. And so he stays in while the father goes out. And he brings his service. He's trying to bring his son back into the house. So it's, like I said, each of these characters has a purpose and a meaning, and we should be able to relate to each of them. Now, so the older son is frequently we make him one-dimensional, but he's not all evil person. We can't just say that about him. He's got his reasons for not coming in. This younger son, I mean, in one sense, because the younger son had taken his inheritance, the younger son now was using the older son's inheritance. He was going to be supported by the older son's inheritance by staying at home and in the farm. So the older son, might not have liked that idea. He may have, lost sight of the fact of why he was serving the father, lost sight of the fact of who his father was, and what his father had done for him. And of course, all the resentment that is that sibling rivalry that we all know about, I think, or that many of us know about anyways. Not me, but all my brothers, they resent me because I'm so good. I don't know if they're listening on here today, but and I think we have to look at these parables and really ask ourselves, how would I respond? And as the older son, how would I respond as the younger son? And we all want to be that younger son in a sense. We all want to be the one that came to realize, what it was. But And again, that picture of repentance is there. The younger son came to his senses. And then what does he do? He turns around, heads home after having left it, and he's welcomed into the house and becomes the son again. The older son, who's always been the son, stays outside. And so it's asking us and challenging us to look at our reasons for doing things, and looking at what it is, what these reasons are, and what it is that we might be giving up by holding on to that reason or resentment or whatever it is, but holding on to that and not entering the house, the home. So now we look a little bit at the father. Again, he's the main character of this story. He's in each of the scenes. When that younger son makes his request for his inheritance, how does the father hear that? It's again, this frequently when we look at this as in an allegorical manner, it's the father is related to God. We kind of think of him in that term, to God the Father. And so how does God the Father hear this request for his inheritance? What does he do? He gives it to him. And again, like I said, that was basically a statement was saying, Dad, I wish you were dead. So give me what I will get when you die. And then I wonder sometimes, did he ever discuss that with the older child, or did the older child just sit there steaming about it for however long the other son was away? What does he do? What does the father do? What's his action in this? He gives the inheritance. His next action is he's waiting for the younger son to return. He's looking for him, watching for him. And as soon as he comes into view, what does the father do? He leaves. He goes out to greet the son. He doesn't wait for the son to get home. He goes out and he rejoices with the son, so to speak, and makes him reinstates him as his son. And so he leaves that comfort zone to meet the younger child. And again, it's revealing something to us about who God is, making it attractive to people to turn around and head to home, head to God. The older son stays outside the house. What does the father do? He goes out to him. He leaves his comfort zone. He leaves all of the comforts of home, and he goes out to his older son to bring him in. He's, again, revealing something about who God is. That God does not, when Jesus talks about going out to sinners, God goes out to both sons. We see that the younger son was a real sinner easily, a life of dissipation. Words they won't even tell us what he did in the Bible because it's too gross to say, I guess. So he lives this life of dissipation. It's easy to connect with, oh yeah, he's a sinner, but the younger son is a sinner too, and his failure. Oh, it's after 8. His unwillingness to repent causes him to stay outside. It's his choice to remain outside. Now, I guess I did have enough material for tonight. I was a little worried about it. So again, if you have questions, next week when we start, I'll try to answer some of those questions. If you send them to me, either you can send them to Michelle on the Facebook page. You can, if you're my friend on Facebook, you can instant message me. Or next week when we start, you can, if you're on the Zoom meeting, you can ask the question, okay? That's all I got for tonight. Our time is up. And next week, we'll be talking about the passion narratives and the resurrection narratives. So it'll be a lot of material, but so I won't be able to get everything, but I'll go look at it a little bit closer, some of the stuff, and probably, especially the story on the road to Emmaus, which again is uniquely Luke's, and the passion narrative, the trial, and the arrest, the trial, and the crucifixion as well. Okay. Thank you. Bye-bye, everybody.